technical issues. Let me just check on this real fast. Okay, it seems to be running here. Okay, so, it seems to be, there we go. Technical difficulties, okay. Now, let's see the Wikipedia page on this. Operation Lone Star is a joint operation between the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Military Department along the southern border between Texas and Mexico, which started in 2021 and is currently ongoing. Let's see, implemented 2021. It's currently ongoing. According to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, the operation is intended to counter a rise in illegal immigration, the illegal drug trade, and human smuggling. Between fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021, migrant apprehensions had risen 278% along the U.S.-Mexico border. Okay. Let's see. So let's organize this a little bit. Okay, so we get the gist of what this is now. There's a bunch of notable events here. Announces border wall construction. First section of border wall. Designates Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. Nice. Borders opposition Mike Banks. Okay, so pretty much this looks like Texas just going ham on this is what Operation Lone Star is. But let's see, where's 2024? Okay. Okay, I think I'm just going to learn more about this by reading the current news. Okay. Biden vows border shutdown if Congress passes deal. U.S. President Joe Biden says he backs a bipartisan Senate border deal that gives him powers to shut down the border when it becomes overwhelmed. I feel like actually this deserves its own thing here. Okay, if given the authority, I will use it the day I sign the bill into law. So you have an immigration thing that Biden is on board with. Mr. Biden urged lawmakers to pass a deal, calling it the toughest and fairest set of reforms seen yet. I guess this is kind of what I mean when I say conservatives are being kind of weird when they say Biden's open borders. Clearly he's not. Former President Donald Trump has also tried to tank the deal, urging Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson to only accept if it is perfect on the border. Pressure has been mounting on Mr. Biden to act on the U.S.-Mexico border as he vies for a second term in the White House. He is likely to face off against Mr. Trump, who has taken a hardline stance on immigration, again in the upcoming presidential election. Okay, immigration is a central issue ahead of the election, with voters in Iowa and New Hampshire delivering primary victories to Mr. Trump in part due to the concerns over the border. In December, migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border averaged more than 9,500 per day. That's probably important to know. Adding to the pressure, some Republicans have set a deal on border security as a condition for further Ukraine aid. A border deal is also integral to the approval of further aid for Israel and Taiwan, as Republicans in the House said that they will not back more funding for either without it. Okay. So I do feel like this border deal needs a section 2. Adding to the pressure. Okay, we read that. Whoop. It would help if I was paying any attention. Okay, so, okay, yeah, I've got a thing down here actually. Just picking off from my notes from yesterday. Okay, Mr. Biden's latest comments come as Senate negotiators try to win the approval of some House colleagues who have vowed to strike down the current border deal. Top Senate Republicans, like Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, have urged them to pass it. Mr. McConnell called it a unique opportunity to accomplish something in a divided government that wouldn't be there under a unified government. Yes. Okay, so McConnell okay, so yeah, here's what I don't get. And this is, okay, so if, this is the part I was struggling with yesterday. So if there is a state, Texas, openly defying the U.S. Constitution, right? Openly defying the Supremacy Clause, openly defying the federal government and the federal government's immigration laws, citing that there is, where is this? Citing that there's a, what do you call it, invasion, right? And terrorists and fentanyl and whatever. Like, not that that's not totally false, but okay, so Texas is openly defying federal law because of this, right? But here they have a border deal to help solve that problem. The president has already said he would sign it, and they're rejecting the deal. So that makes me not sympathetic at all to Texas, honestly. Well, okay, maybe not people living in Texas, that's fine. But like Abbott and the GOP and whatever, like, that's tough. That just totally doesn't make any sense. Trump slams border deal as catastrophe waiting to happen. Let's see. This notes app is wild sometimes. There we go. Former President Trump slammed the U.S.-Mexico border deal as a catastrophe waiting to happen in a flurry of Truth Social posts written on Saturday. In a Saturday Morning Post, Trump called the southern border the worst in the history of the world and alleged that the U.S. might suffer from another terrorist attack. Okay, so you're telling the GOP not to take the deal. If it's that bad, right? If it's that bad, just 3 years ago, we'd have the strongest and safest border in U.S. history. Trump wrote on Truth Social, today we have a catastrophe waiting to happen. It's the worst border in the history of the world, an open wound in our once great country. Terrorists are pouring in unchecked from all over the world. There is now a 100% chance that there will be major terrorist attacks and they close the border. Again, this is really retarded. When they have a deal on the table that they won't take. That makes this whole thing retarded. Trump continued his messaging to Republicans in Congress that they should abstain from reaching a bipartisan deal on the southern border. A bad border deal is worse than no border deal. I mean, okay, but I'd like to see exactly why. He said that the border became a weapon of mass destruction and that the U.S. went from having the best border to the worst in just 3 years. Okay, implying that he did anything about it, because that's probably what we'll go to next. But I'm thinking the spoiler alert's going to be he didn't do very much. The former president's stance on the current Senate negotiations over giving aid to Ukraine and other countries and addressing the border is giving lawmakers trouble in reaching an agreement. It also has upset lawmakers on both sides as they deal with the former president's influence over the Republican Party. One of those aggravated lawmakers has been Tom Tillis. So it would be immoral not to strike a border deal just to assist the former president politically. Yeah, I'm in total agreement with this. I didn't come here to have the president as a boss or a candidate as a boss. I came here to pass good, solid policy. It is immoral for me to think you look down the other way because you think this is the linchpin for... Yeah, that makes total sense. So I should say MAGA GOP position, but then... All right. What did McConnell say? I think I've... Yeah, okay. Actually, this belongs down here. I almost feel like there should be two separate notes now. Just because this is going from the border standoff into the immigration deal. Okay. Ever since winning the Iowa caucuses in the New Hampshire primary, Trump has opposed the legislation to address the border, which also includes funding for U.S. allies, partially because he thinks the border provisions do not go far enough, but also wants to use the southern border issue against Biden, his likely rival in November. Okay. Negotiations in the U.S. border accelerated in mid-December when the Biden administration officials and the White House joined ongoing talks. Has publicly asked the White House to participate earlier, even since the negotiations started in mid-November. Okay. Let's see. Establishment Republicans on Texas border standoff. Hold the line. Republicans rally to Abbott's defense in border standoff with Biden. from the Texas House to former President Donald Trump. Republicans across the country are rallying behind Governor Greg Abbott's legal standoff with the federal government at the southern border, intensifying concerns about a constitutional crisis amid an ongoing dispute with the Biden administration. Okay. At issue, so they put up the barbed wire. It's using as a barrier between the Rio Grande River and Shelby Park, a 47-acre area. Okay. So this is helpful. So it's not a large area. In a 5-4 decision earlier this week, U.S. Supreme Court sided with the Biden administration when it vacated a lower court's ruling that prevented Border Patrol agents from cutting the wire. Okay, and so the SCOTUS ruling Okay, so Texas said the Border Patrol couldn't cut the wire. The Supreme Court overruled, but that's just the barbed wire, though, right? On Wednesday, and as the Texas National Guard and state troops continued to roll out the wire and prevent federal agents from accessing much of the park, Abbott continued to publicly challenge the ruling and hold the line. He declared that Texas was under an invasion, giving the state the constitutional right to defend itself, and claimed that President Joe Biden's practice of paroling migrants into the country amounted to a refusal to enforce current immigration laws. President Biden has violated his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Instead of prosecuting immigrants for the federal crime of illegal entry, President Biden has sent his lawyers into federal courts to sue Texas for taking action to secure the border. The state's right to defend itself, supreme law of the land, and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. Abbott's action is the latest effort by Texas Republicans who have been pushing back against the federal government and trying to take on the role of immigration law enforcement, which is under federal jurisdiction. Okay, so I guess now we have to go down a rabbit hole here. Okay, let's see. What would help clear this up? What would help clear this up? So I think okay. Unlawful entry. Section 135 sets forth criminal offenses relating to 1, improper entry into the United States by an alien, and 2, entry into marriage for the purpose of evading immigration laws, and 3, establishing, the Illegal Immigration Reform Responsibility Act. For the alien comprehended while entering or attempting to enter the United States at a time or place other than designated civil penalty. But what is the illegal immigration statute? What I want to know is, what is the law they are accusing Biden of not enforcing? These are civil penalties. Okay, these are civil penalties, but what is the criminal? Current U.S. illegal immigration law. The act mandates that immigrants who are unlawfully present in the U.S. are for 180 days, but for under 365 days must remain outside the United States for 3 years unless pardoned. Okay, so maybe we can get some answers on here. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 strengthened U.S. immigration laws, adding penalties for undocumented immigrants who commit crimes while in the United States or stay in the U.S. for statutorily defined periods of time. Okay. Okay. Expenses. How many pages is it? 750. Jesus Christ. Let's see. Okay, so here, let's do table of contents. Yeah, I might have to look through this off stream because there's a ton here and there's no like index or table of contents or anything. Where's a table of contents? Anywhere. All right, that was my alarm to go get stuffed peppers. I'll be right back. Actually, let me just put something on the screen here. Let's see. Let's find something to put on for a few minutes.
For the grave threat to our national security and our nation's sovereignty
Here we go.
these policies have created. But instead of taking responsibility and providing leadership, this
We have some updates on the crisis.
Shut up.
administration has done nothing
Okay.
but attack
I'll be right back.
elected officials who are trying to fix this catastrophe. The people standing behind you have worked hard. We passed our legislation more than 7 months ago. You have red and blue states all across this country that are being forced to step up because the federal government has failed to do its job. Right here in Texas, Governor Abbott has heroically done more to enforce the law than the president has. And how has this administration responded? They have sued the state of Texas to stop their deterrence efforts. They have brought them to court to strike down their ability to put up buoys in the water and razor wire and the rest. It's absolute insanity. The House has done its job. As I mentioned, we delivered common sense legislation that will secure our border. But it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk for 7 months. House Resolution 2 was our bill, and the time to act on it is yesterday. It certainly needs to happen. With each passing day, each record broken, this administration's dereliction of duty becomes more and more dangerous and more infuriating, and we are here to say that it must stop. What we saw today only made House Republicans more resolved to stand for sanity and the American people, and we will do it. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin by defending America's national security. It begins right here on our southern border. Well, we want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank all of my colleagues for joining me here in the epicenter of the crisis that we're having on the border here in Eagle Pass, Texas. It's been quite a day. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've learned here today. But first I want to tell you that we have a great cross-section of the House. We have 64 House Republicans that have joined us here in Eagle Pass. They represent 26 states, 1 U.S. territory. You have everybody from California to Maryland, from Michigan to Florida. We represent over half the U.S. states because every state in America is now a border state. And we've seen that on vivid display today. Today we were able to meet with local residents, with sheriffs, with the Texas DPS. We also toured the CBP processing facility here in Eagle Pass, and it's been an eye-opener. One thing is absolutely clear. America is at a breaking point with record levels of illegal immigration, and today we got a first-hand look at the damage and the chaos the border catastrophe is causing in all of our communities. The situation here and across the country is truly unconscionable. We would describe it as both heartbreaking and infuriating. Our communities are overrun. We have local resources that are being strapped. We have lethal drugs that are pouring into our country at record levels. And it's in less than 3 years that President Biden took office that this has happened. That we have over 7 million illegal encounters at the border, nearly 2 million known gotaways, and that doesn't count the many that are undetected. At 312 suspects on the terrorist watch list that have been apprehended. Communities are overrun. We have no idea how many terrorists have come into the country and set up terrorism cells across the nation. Last month alone, we saw the most illegal crossings in recorded history. It is an unmitigated disaster, a catastrophe. And what's more tragic is that it's a disaster of the president's own design. About an hour ago, we had lunch, and there are a number of sheriffs that work and serve here along the border of Texas. The sheriff of Terrell County was one of them. He was a former Border Patrol agent for 26 years, and he said in his estimation, it took less than 6 months for the Biden administration to dismantle 100 years of progress that the U.S. Border Patrol had achieved. Some of the first actions that Joe Biden took when he rolled into the Oval Office were that he rolled back border security measures. They were put in place by the Trump administration. We all saw it happen. Remember, it was on his very first day in office that President Biden stopped construction of the southern border wall, and he ended the Remain in Mexico policy. It was estimated on our tour just a moment ago that if the Biden administration would reinstate just the Remain in Mexico policy, it could stem the flow by probably 70% or more. But he refuses to do it. And since the time that President Biden took office, the administration has done next to nothing to protect the border. But we've all seen with our own eyes, they have opened the border wide to the entire world. It's estimated that nearly 170 countries have people coming in and flowing across this border. And some of these are from nations that have high numbers of concentration. And these are not people who are fleeing and looking for asylum, that are in fear for their lives in their home countries. We have hardened criminals coming across that border. They're the ones being released from prisons from some of these countries and sent here to come into the U.S. Rather than incentivizing people to come, the president needs to deter people from entering the country. Rather than discussing amnesty with Mexico, as top Biden administration officials did within the last couple of weeks, this administration should reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, as was said. Rather than expanding parole authority to an unprecedented scale, the president should obviously end catch and release and stop the abuse of our parole and asylum systems. The president can and should act now.
So who is this?
This doesn't require legislation. It requires leadership. And despite the White House's claim, he has all the authority he needs right now under existing federal law to stop
I'm assuming
this
this is Abbott, right?
But the message his policies have sent is the opposite of that. It's quite clear. Under President Biden, America has laid out a welcome mat to illegal immigrants, smugglers, and
I need
cartels.
to switch to Chrome.
He is responsible for the grave threat to our national security and our nation's sovereignty that these policies have created. But instead of taking responsibility and providing leadership, this administration has done nothing but attack elected officials who are trying to fix this catastrophe. The people standing behind you have worked hard. We passed our legislation more than 7 months ago. You have red and blue states all across this country that are being forced to step up because the federal government has failed to do its job. Right here in Texas, Governor Abbott has heroically done more to enforce the law than the president has. And how has this administration responded? They have sued the state of Texas to stop their deterrence efforts. They have brought them to court to strike down their ability to put up buoys in the water and razor wire. It's absolute insanity. The House has done its job. As I mentioned, we delivered common sense legislation that will secure our border. But it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk for 7 months. House Resolution 2 was our bill, and the time to act on it is yesterday. It certainly needs to happen. With each passing day, each record broken, this administration's dereliction of duty becomes more and more dangerous and more infuriating, and we are here to say that it must stop. What we saw today only made House Republicans more resolved to stand for sanity and the American people, and we will do it. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin by defending America's national security. It begins right here on our southern border. Well, we want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank all of my colleagues for joining me here in the epicenter of the crisis that we're having on the border here in Eagle Pass, Texas. It's been quite a day. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've learned here today. But first I want to tell you that we have a great cross-section of the House. We have 64 House Republicans that have joined us here in Eagle Pass. They represent 26 states, 1 U.S. territory. You have everybody from California to Maryland, from Michigan to Florida. We represent over half the U.S. states because every state in America is now a border state. And we've seen that on vivid display today. Today we were able to meet with local residents, with sheriffs, with the Texas DPS. We also toured the CBP processing facility here in Eagle Pass, and it's been an eye-opener. One thing is absolutely clear. America is at a breaking point with record levels of illegal immigration, and today we got a first-hand look at the damage and the chaos the border catastrophe is.
At the southern border, an immigration deal. We have some updates on the crisis at the southern border. An immigration deal drafted by Senator Chuck Schumer and James Lankford seems dead on arrival in the House as congressional Republicans balked at what they saw as another mass amnesty bill. Chad Pergram writes on X that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is supportive of Senator Lankford's work to, quote, finalize the most substantial border security policy in 30 years that would come not a moment too soon.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has issued an emergency injunction allowing Border Patrol agents to cut wire Texas had installed along the border near a popular crossing at Eagle Pass. Litigation continues over other Texas immigration policies, including floating barriers in the Rio Grande, alongside the incarceration of illegal immigrants by the state. those cases have yet to reach the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so this decision made a lot of conservatives on social media very angry yesterday. So it's an injunction. The decision party, they haven't actually heard the case. That will take place. But in the meantime, those barriers, those security measures that the state erected can be taken down by the federal government. It was a 5-4 vote to allow the federal government to do that, with Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts and the liberals, Elena Kagan, Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson on one side, and then you had Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas. Oh, actually, well, there was one more. I'm misstating who. Maybe Kavanaugh was on that
Roberts
side too?
and Barrett
Who am I
joined
missing?
the 3 liberal justices.
Roberts and Barrett, so not Kavanaugh. Roberts and Barrett. So that was perceived as kind of a betrayal from the conservatives on social media. Obviously, the issue is the federal government
rights.
claims they have the jurisdiction, and in the previous Supreme Courts have recognized that ultimately they have jurisdiction.
They do have jurisdiction
on international border issues.
Yeah, but this is a pretty clear federal preemption issue. I'm surprised, frankly, it wasn't more lopsided holding. I mean, just take for a second, imagine for a second that Texas is a Democratic state. Imagine a world where Democratic Texas says, we're going to have open borders. Now, suddenly, would you feel different about whether or not federal policy should preempt state policy, given the kind of national implications of what a state on a border might do?
That's a good point, actually. I would put it a little differently, though. What if Trump wins, right? But then California decides to tear their border wall or their barrier down and says California is open borders. Conservatives would not have any of that, right? So, this is not a world anyone wants to live in.
So this doesn't mean that, federal policy is going to be one thing or another. And it certainly isn't an argument that no one's going to be losing the border. It's simply an argument that if you're someone who's hoping Donald Trump is going to win, or is looking at polls that's indicating that Donald Trump is going to win, that the President of the United States federal mandate, the congressional mandate, is what decides border policy, not whoever happens to be in control of a state that happens to be on the border with another country.
Right.
I think on the constitutional merits, you're correct. That's probably frustrating and cold comfort for the state of Texas that feels like, the federal government is not willing to expend the resources to police the border, so we will step up and do it, and now you're saying we're not allowed to do it, which, again, I think technically is, in fact, the case. That's what the Supreme Court decided temporarily in this injunction, and is probably ultimately what they will decide, is that it is a federal government issue. The federal government needs to fix the immigration system. It's their failure to act that puts us in this position.
But here's the issue. Biden has requested a $14 billion spend for the border. It's not getting passed because of Republican obstruction. So you can say that there's not enough commitment, there's not enough spending, there's not enough investment. But if, at the end of the day, what has been reported as happening is that Republicans know that being able to make a lot of hay about a border crisis helps them electorally, and they'd rather push this issue until the election in order to get the benefit of being able to say Joe Biden isn't doing anything about the border, which really raises the question about whether or not Republicans in Congress.
So is this video about Tucker being unhinged or not? Because that's what I clicked on this for.
Congress right now are putting the interests and safeties of Americans before or after their political futures.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bipartisan failure, and a failure not to pair it with some improvements to the immigration system, because frankly, I mean, I have some, I'm not as enthusiastic about the wall or people have found ways around this. I don't want to spend a gazillion more dollars on security measures that fail or are overcome, when what we really need to do is fix the underlying incentives and the system for people to come here, so that they're not coming here in that way, and then we're spending all this money on security measures that don't even work. I mean, it's a vast border.
Look, the problem is that the underlying incentives, I know as much as some Republicans like to frame it as the incentive is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are standing at the border with a big welcome flag saying, everybody come to America.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
I said some Republicans. You don't even identify as Republican. But the reality is the incentives are created by the fact that we're the wealthiest country in the history of the world that has spent so much of its time and energy and money applying sanctions to the global South, including countries in South and Central America, toppling governments, fomenting coups and the like that have created disastrous conditions for people who are, frankly, in walking distance because of the nature of the land bridge to the United States of America. And either you're going to cure that or you're not. But it's not going to happen by simply muscling up the border because the incentives are there. People live in such terrible conditions that they are willing to leave their homes, everybody they know, everybody who speaks their language, and drag their children across in inhumane conditions in order for the hope of a better life. So between that I think fundamental issue that's not being really addressed by either party, and the fact that part of what's precluding this $14 billion package going through is Republicans saying, well, how are we going to pay for it? And trying to make it contingent on other cuts to other policies, some of which, I got to say, benefit the very Americans that they're saying are being hurt by immigration, these social safety net policies. That's why we have this lack of traction here.
I mean, I would like to clarify and simplify the actual system for coming into the country legally, because it is hopelessly confusing. I encourage everyone who thinks like, oh, why don't they just come here legally?
Okay, that's stupid. Let me see if he actually said that or not. I think this is what I just watched, right? Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that he didn't say it. Let's see. Border standoff. Because if he really did say shit like that, it'd be everywhere. It wouldn't be at the end of a 9-fucking-minute video.
On Monday, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the Biden administration is legally allowed to open the border by force to cut down razor wire along the Rio Grande sector of the U.S.-Mexico border in Texas. The usual suspects voted for this: Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, but they were joined by so-called conservative justices John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. So in response to this ruling, which shocked many, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, drafted a letter, not simply to the administration, but to the world. And here's part of what it says. Under President Biden's lawless border policies, more than 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years. That is more than the population of 33 different states in this country. This illegal refusal to protect the states has inflicted unprecedented harm on the people all across the United States. Abbott goes on to say the state of Texas has the authority under the Constitution to, quote, protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land, and it supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. And then, following very quickly,
That's only true under, like, invasion conditions, right? But okay, so they're stretching the word invasion, which is fine. Well, okay, I shouldn't say that. That's not fine. They don't have a basis to stand on.
5 other states with Republican governors signed a letter pledging their support to Texas and its constitutional right to defend itself and this country. Those states include Ohio, Florida, Utah, Nevada, and many others. And then the Biden administration responded. The administration threatened these states, and particularly Texas, with a, quote, 24-hour deadline to allow Border Patrol to reopen the border and to take down the barbed wire. Clearly a collision course. What happens next? We're thankful to be joined now by Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who joins us by phone from India. Governor Abbott, thank you so much for joining us.
What's he doing in India?
If the administration declares that it plans to federalize...
What the fuck's he doing in India? When he's... So you're going to pick a fight with the feds and not even be in the fucking country? Oh, boy.
the National Guard of the state of Texas, your National Guard, what will be your response?
Well, first, I'll be shocked. That would be a boneheaded move on his part, a total disaster. But for one, as you might imagine, we are prepared in the event that that unlikely event does occur to make sure that we will be able to continue exactly what we've been doing over the past month, and that is building these barriers, whether it be the concertina wire or other anti-climb border barriers, whatever we've been building. The Biden administration is now trying to attack us because of it, and we will continue to do exactly what we're doing to expand our denial of illegal entry into the state of Texas.
With state employees, I assume, not with National Guard, but can you envision a scenario in which you would put armed state employees on the border instead of the National Guard of Texas?
We do have other armed state employees on the border as we speak right this minute, and that's the Texas Department of Public Safety, as well as other law enforcement officers, as well as National Guard from other states. And you can be assured there will be more National Guard from other states and more law enforcement officers within the state of Texas and other states. And, Tucker, I just signed a new law in the state of Texas that will go into effect on March the 5th that authorizes any law enforcement officer in the state of Texas to be able to arrest anybody coming across the border illegally.
Have you spoken to the president or anyone from the Biden White House about what appears to be an imminent collision?
I have not, to be clear. I have spoken to the president about the border. I met him on a tarmac in El Paso and talked to him directly about what was going on. I handed him a letter that had in it immediate solutions he could take that would immediately secure the border without the need of any new law to be passed. Despite the fact that I handed him on altogether 8 different letters, he has refused to ever respond. My point in telling you that, we have laid down the precursor of what's called Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution to show that we have been invaded and we have demanded support from the president to safeguard our state, and they have refused to do so 8 times, and that authorized me to...
It's not an invasion in the way that the Constitution means. That's the problem. You can't just stretch the intended meanings of words. Okay. So what about what we call domestic violence? That's in this statute, right? Can we just start defying federal law because domestic violence is bad in the country? Well, no, because they meant domestic violence is something else, right?
To declare an invasion under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution to make sure that Texas is going to be able to use every tool in our arsenal to defend our state.
Of the couple of dozen Republican-led states who've pledged support for you, how many do you think would send National Guard to Texas?
I'll be shocked and disappointed if almost all of them do not send. There have been about 10 so far that have sent National Guard or other law enforcement. They now are joined together with us, and this is a fight for the future of America, and they all know it. And so I believe that they will all be in on December.
It's just a remarkable moment, and I know you're heading out, but my final question is, how do you see this resolving? What happens next?
Well, Texas is going to continue to expand the border barriers that we are erecting, the razor wire that we're putting up, and to continue to gain control of more land over the coming months. I believe, however, that this will all come to an end on January the 20th of next year, because I believe a new president will be sworn in, a president who will actually enforce the immigration laws of the entire country, not just the Texas border.
All right. I'm done. I think I've made up my mind. So this will end when you get Trump in, right? But he's the one torpedoing the current deal that could help you out in this thing you're claiming is an invasion. Okay. So I think I know enough to get some final thoughts here. I mean, okay, so the border is a shit show. Everyone knows the border is a shit show. I haven't met a sane person who would claim otherwise, right? But the problem is a couple of different things. So problem number one is the word invasion is being misused, and everyone knows it. The Constitution meant military invasion. The example I gave earlier, domestic violence, right? Like, what they meant by this domestic violence is like riots, that kind of thing. Not how we use the term domestic violence today, inner household violence or whatever. That would be a misuse of this term, just like they were misusing this term, one, okay? Number two, the problem with 110.3 unless actually invaded. That's the key word. Again, you're not being invaded in the way that the Constitution clearly says. That's number two. Number three is you are never going to convince me that if Trump got elected and California decided to tear down their barrier and say California's open borders, right, and defy all immigration law, you can't tell me that conservatives wouldn't lose their shit. So this is just stupid. And all of this, and in the backdrop on all of this, is there is a current deal on the table to fix the immigration problem. And Trump and the GOP look like they don't want it. But then they turn around and openly defy federal law because the federal government's not doing anything, but they're the ones in the federal government not doing anything. I don't know. I don't think I'm missing anything here. I think I can call this pretty open and shut. I mean, okay, so I do feel for the people in Texas and on border states who have to deal with that. I lived in a border state for a while. I get it. But you can't have states openly defying federal law like that. No one wants to live where that's a thing. Yeah, I think that's all I got. This is stupid. We're gonna have a civil war over a misuse of over a clear misusage of a couple words in the Constitution. Boy.